It's pretty elementary to assume that if you call yourself a leftist, then you care about the freedom of the working class from capitalist society. Otherwise, it would be pointless in desiring a society in which people have full and conscious control over their own lives, which is what communism and anarchism are about at the end of the day. Even though a lot of leftists hold this position of believing in the victory and freedom of the working class, their view of what the working class is and its capabilities are usually contradictory to that very belief. A good example of this can be found within things, historically, such as Blanchism, which is a conception that revolution should be carried out by a small group of highly organized and secretive conspirators. Another example of this is Lassalleism, which is a strategy that believes that the pursuit of socialism can be achieved through the usage of the state, with Ferdinand Lassalle believing that the working class were incapable of emancipating themselves and needed the existing state to achieve socialism. A third and last example is vanguardism, which is an organizational strategy which argues that the most class-conscious sections of the working class rally the rest of the working class to victory. All these strategies have historically failed miserably, along with two of these figures in the strategies no longer being mentioned or remembered in most leftist circles. Even though no one really remembers them, their beliefs in what they still did persist to this day, in different forms, along with many examples I can keep listing off. What makes all of them the same is the belief that the working class as a whole, in one way or another, is too stupid, backwards, indoctrinated, reactionary, or incapable of emancipating themselves, and other measures must be taken outside of them to secure a new society. Such a worldview only shows itself to be divorced from history when you pay close attention to how the masses throughout history have struggled for freedom. Throughout the beginning of class society, the oppressed have always, out of necessity to survive and obtain freedom, struggled against their oppressors at every point in time, with each struggle only differing in intensity and magnitude at each point in time. This is what Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto are getting at when they begin the book with, "The history," referring to written history at that time, "of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle." This quote can be even more elaborated upon by saying that history, written or unwritten, is a history of human beings struggling for freedom and necessity. Books such as A People's History of the World by Chris Harman and Marxism and Freedom by Raya Dunayevskaya are two of many historical writings that help to best illustrate and give a better detailed analysis of what I'm saying. But to be more simple about what I'm saying, let's take the Irish Revolution for example. This is a passage from Marxism and Freedom which gives a good summary of the Irish victory over the British. On Easter Day 1916, the Irish masses acted. The shortage of food which was being used for military needs, the threat to conscript Irishmen for service in the British Army, the heavy taxation, the jailing of thousands under the Defence of the Realm Act, all brought to a fever pitch the anger of the Irish people. The insurrection began with proclaiming of the Irish Republic at the foot of Nelson's column in Dublin. Detachments of Irish volunteers seized important positions throughout Dublin: the General Post Office, St. Stephen's Green, the forecourts, bridges, the rooftop vantage points. The military force was the Irish Volunteers, organized in 1913 under the impact of the heroic strike of the Irish Transport Workers Union to defend its constitutional rights, and by 1916 strengthened by the Citizen Army, formed by the great Marxist revolutionary James P. Colony. At Jacob's factory, the poor workers of the district formed themselves as an unarmed human barrier around the factory, protecting their means of making a living from destruction by the British Army. Women and girls carried food and ammunition to the barricades, fought alongside their men, carried dispatches between points held by the rebels. The teenage girls, organized by the Kuma Naban, the Boy Scouts, organized by Countess de Markievicz, were everywhere in the fighting and dispatch carrying. The worker intellectual, the clergyman, the shopkeeper, and the manufacturer all were determined to rid themselves of British domination. As one journalist, Maurice Joy, wrote, "There were no intellectual boundary lines. Poets wrote treatises on wireless telegraphy, and wireless telegraphers wrote dramas. Above all, there were no dilettantes among them." On the first day, the British were stunted by the activity and success of the Irish. The conduct of the Irish during these events was above reproach, as even the most bitter English enemy had to admit. There was no looting, rapine, or brutality. Captives received the same treatment as those defending the barricades. The slogan of the men was, "'Tis better to have fought and lost than to have never fought at all." It not only delivered a powerful blow to the British Empire, it gave a signal to the world that man's struggle for freedom was not alone an ideological, but a material force. The revolt was not crushed until all forces were completely out of ammunition and isolated from all support. It raised a flame that would continue to burn until independence was finally won. More examples can be provided, such as the Paris Commune, the Russian Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, the Stonewall Riots, and the International George Floyd protests, but I think you get the idea already of how self-movement of the working class is something which is not only historical, but is constant throughout history. Some of you may now be saying, well sure, these events happened and were led by the workers themselves, but how do we overcome the reactionary elements and ideological indoctrination that the working class, especially today, faces? What is usually meant by this is how do we overcome the issues of bigotry amongst the working class and complacency within people that is brought about by media and institutions? The first part of the question is question begging, since it presupposes that a great aggregate of the working class is bigoted. Though systemic racism and other forms of bigotry are things which exist and must be actively combated, this does not mean that a great aggregate of the working class is bigoted. The sections of society that perpetuate bigotry are the ruling class, good sections of the petit bourgeois, and small but significant sections of the working class, but not the working class as a whole, especially if you understand marginalized groups to be part of the working class and issues that affect them to be working class issues. Furthermore, all struggles are connected in a way that multiple oppressed groups fight in sync with each other rather than fight in isolation from each other. Revolution and social change are pluralistic and interconnected. Any form of class reductionism is not only ahistorical, but antithetical to what revolution is, which is the complete transformation of all aspects of society and not just one aspect of society. The second part of the question is a problem which exists but is still in some way a bit ridiculous to state. While it is true that media and other institutions perpetuate ideas and beliefs that are designed to make people conform to the status quo, it functions more like a foggy mist that makes it hard for people to understand things, rather than some simulation that makes people doubt their own ability to perceive reality or do anything. Every day, people, despite all the constant media, still question, struggle, and undermine the institutions that oppress them, no matter what country they live in or who they are. We see this in China, where even though China has one of the most strictest control over media institutions, along with a massive surveillance state, we can see things such as the Hong Kong protests that have happened not too long ago, and the Lying Flat movement, in which youth in China are abstaining from working, which is threatening the existing powers of China. Just like with bigotry, status quo ideology is something that needs to be actively combated, but is not enough to stop workers as a whole from struggling against their workplaces and governments. This is because, again, a great aggregate of people are not going to stand by idly as their lives and desires are diminished by systems that don't care about them. They're going to find different ways and solutions to the problems that face them every day in life. In conclusion, history has proven that workers will fight, organize, and emancipate themselves without the help of any outside force. They learn all of this through living out their lives and utilizing their own creative actions and solutions to try and address issues within their lives. Does this mean that revolutionaries are useless in fighting for the emancipation of the working class? Of course not. What this means is that we have to reevaluate our understanding of what the working class is, so we don't fall into these traps of bad strategies for achieving a new society. Furthermore, revolutionaries are part of the working class, and what we can uniquely do is document and make intelligible the struggles going on so that other people can be aware of this information and utilize it. In other words, we utilize theory and philosophy which we obtain from learning from the self-movement of the masses to further and strengthen their movement. I can go into more detail about organization and what revolutionaries should do, but that's another video on its own. As for everything else, I made my point already. Let me leave all of you with a fun quote from Marx. We cannot, therefore, go along with people who openly claim that the workers are too ignorant to emancipate themselves, but must first be emancipated from the top down by the philanthropic big and the petty bourgeois. Should the new party organ take a position that corresponds with the ideas of those gentlemen, become bourgeois and not proletarian, then there is nothing left for us, sorry as we should be to do so, than to speak out against it publicly and dissolve the solidarity within which we have hitherto represented the German party abroad. But we hope it will not come to that.